You helped them. You gave your time, your money, your contacts, your energy, sometimes all four at once. And what came back wasn't gratitude. It was distance, then silence. Then, if you were unlucky enough to stay close, something that looked a lot like contempt. You told yourself it was ingratitude, maybe bad character, maybe you just picked the wrong person. But that explanation has never fully satisfied you, because it keeps happening. Not with one person, with a pattern of people. And patterns don't come from bad luck. Patterns come from a mechanism you haven't named yet. Friedrich Nietzsche spent much of his intellectual life studying what human beings do when forced to confront their own weakness. Not the weakness they perform for sympathy, the real kind. The kind that surfaces when someone else's generosity makes it impossible to pretend anymore. What he found explains, with uncomfortable precision, exactly what happens to people who help. In this video, you're going to understand the 7 reasons why the people you help end up turning on you. Not as a list of personal failures on their part, but as a map of a psychological mechanism almost no one discusses honestly. By the end, you won't just understand what happened. You'll know how to read people before it happens again. The 7th reason is the one most people never recognize. It's the deepest, the most disguised, and the one that will permanently change who you decide to extend yourself for. The first reason, your help made them feel small. This sounds counterintuitive, so it needs to be said plainly. When you help someone, you are not only solving their problem, you are also establishing a fact that they had a problem, that they needed someone, that on this particular day, in this particular area of their life, they were not enough on their own. For most people, that fact is manageable. They say thank you, move on, maybe return the favor someday. But for a specific kind of person, one whose self-image depends entirely on the story that they are capable, self-sufficient, never in debt to anyone, your help is not a gift. It's an exposure. Picture a colleague struggling with a project for weeks. You step in, fix the core problem in an afternoon, and hand it back. You meant nothing by it. But what they now have to carry is the knowledge that you saw them stuck, that you witnessed the gap between who they present themselves as and who they actually were in that moment. For some people, that gap is unbearable. So what do they do with the unbearable? They don't sit with it. They convert it. The discomfort gets redirected outward, and you become the target. Not consciously, this is not a calculated move in most cases. It is an automatic psychological function. The help that exposed them must now be neutralized, and the person who helped must be diminished. You didn't do anything wrong. The problem was never your help. The problem was that your help arrived in a person who could not afford to receive it. The second reason, gratitude requires admitting weakness, and they can't. Gratitude is not a simple emotion. It requires a specific act of internal honesty, acknowledging that you were the one who needed and someone else was the one who provided. For people with a stable sense of self-worth, this costs them nothing. They feel it, express it, and move on. But for people whose identity is built on the idea that they owe nothing to anyone, that everything they have, they earned by force of their own will, gratitude is structurally impossible. To feel it authentically would mean dismantling a story they've been telling themselves for years. Nietzsche wrote about the psychology of the weak will, not weak in the physical sense, in the moral sense. The person who cannot bear to be in anyone's debt is not strong. They are fragile. The inability to receive is a form of poverty dressed as pride. So, instead of gratitude, what you get is a subtle renegotiation of reality. The help gets minimized. The helper gets criticized. The situation gets rewritten until the debt disappears, not because it was paid, but because they convinced themselves it was never real. You'll know this happened when someone you helped starts treating you with a coolness that wasn't there before. Not hostility, not yet, just a slight withdrawal, a recalibration of the relationship to a distance where what you did for them no longer feels so present, so large, so impossible to ignore. The third reason, you became the mirror they hate looking into. There is a particular kind of pain that comes not from what people see in you, but from what they see of themselves when they look at you. After you've helped someone, your existence becomes a living reference point. You are now proof of what they don't have, what they haven't built, what they haven't become. This is especially corrosive in close relationships, friendships, family, partnerships, where proximity makes the comparison inescapable. You help a friend get a job, and every time they see you after that, they are reminded that they needed help getting a job. You lend money to a sibling, and every family dinner becomes a quiet ledger they can't stop reading. People do not enjoy sitting across from their own inadequacy at dinner, so they stop sitting across from you. Nietzsche called this ressentiment, the particular hostility of the person who cannot act on their own desires, so they turn that blocked energy into a moral condemnation of the person who can. It is not jealousy in the simple sense of wanting what you have. It is the resentment of being reminded by your very presence that the gap exists. You didn't fail them, you became inconvenient to their self-image. The fourth reason, helping created a debt they had no intention of paying. When you help someone, a ledger opens, not financial, made of time, effort, reputation, emotional labor. Most people understand this intuitively. Help creates an implicit obligation to be the kind of person who doesn't forget, to hold the relationship with the weight it now carries. Some people never intended to hold that weight, not because they are purely cynical. Many don't even recognize this about themselves. They took your help in a moment of genuine need. But once the crisis passed, the ledger became a burden they didn't want. And a debt that can't be paid gets dealt with the only other way available, by invalidating the currency. If your help didn't matter, there's no debt. If you had selfish reasons, the balance is already close to zero. If they can find something wrong with what you gave, the ledger tears. Watch for people who receive help graciously in the moment, and then, weeks later, begin picking apart its quality. The help was incomplete. You weren't as available as you could have been. You had an agenda. This is not just ingratitude. It is a specific psychological operation. They are negotiating the debt down to zero by devaluing what created it. The fifth reason, they needed the story of being a victim more than they needed your help. Some people have built their entire identity around a narrative of suffering. They are the ones the world failed, never given a fair chance, surrounded by people who always let them down. This narrative serves real functions. It explains their position in life, protects them from confronting their own choices, generates the sympathy that substitutes for the self-respect they don't have. Now you arrive, and you help. And for a moment, their story has a problem. Because if you helped them, they are no longer the person the world abandoned. The narrative requires that help either doesn't come, or that it comes and fails, or that the person who brought it turns out to be just as bad as everyone else. So one of those three things will happen. Either your help won't be enough, the goalpost moves, and it is never quite right. Or it will fail somehow, not because the help was bad, but because failure serves the story. Or you will do something, anything, that allows them to file you into the same category as everyone else who let them down. This was never about you. You were a potential disruption to a story they cannot afford to lose. The sixth reason, your success confirmed what your help implied, that they were behind. By the time you help someone, you are usually ahead of them in some meaningful way. You have the resource, the knowledge, the stability. That gap was always there, abstract, manageable, easy to ignore. Your act of helping made it concrete. It turned a quiet imbalance into a documented fact. And when they see you continue to move forward, every step you take is a reminder of the gap. Not just that it existed, that you were above it while they were below. People who handle this poorly will not tell you what's happening. They'll slow burn the relationship, become subtly competitive in ways that make no sense, undercut you in small social moments, stop celebrating your wins, or celebrate them with a flatness that feels like something else entirely. You'll wonder what you did. The honest answer: you kept going. That was enough. Now, before the last reason, think about one person you helped who walked away or turned against you. You don't have to say their name. Just drop one word in the comments for what you lost when they left. One word. I read every single one. The seventh reason: you threatened the identity they built around suffering. This is what most people never see. There are people who have been suffering for so long that suffering is no longer just something that happens to them. It has become who they are. Their relationships are defined by it. Their plans account for it as a fixed variable. Suffering is the constant. Everything else is temporary. When you help this person effectively, when the help actually lands, you don't just solve a problem. You threaten an identity. You are asking them, implicitly, to become a person who is not in crisis. A person who has support, who is, in some small but real way, okay. And that person is a stranger to them. Nietzsche wrote about the will to power as the drive to become, the force that moves a person toward their own expansion. What he observed with almost clinical precision is that when this drive is blocked long enough, it inverts. Instead of driving the person upward, it roots them in place, makes the current state feel not just comfortable, but necessary, even sacred. The person who has built an identity around suffering does not want to be saved. They want to be witnessed in their suffering. Those are completely different requests, and most helpers confuse them. You showed up ready to solve. They needed you to sit down and confirm that the problem was as large and immovable as they'd always said. When your help implied otherwise, when it suggested that things could actually change, you became, without meaning to, an argument against the story they've built their life around. That is the one thing they cannot forgive. Understanding all of this produces one conclusion. Betrayal from people you've helped is not random. It is the predictable output of a specific psychological architecture built on wounded pride, blocked drives, and identities that depend on a fixed story of limitation. The common thread is this: your help was an act of power, not dominance, genuine power. The power to give, to stabilize, to move. And for certain people, genuine power in someone else is not inspiring. It is threatening, not because they're evil, because they have never developed the interior stability to receive strength from outside themselves without feeling diminished by it. You are not the problem. Let that land. The quiet suspicion you've been carrying, that something you're doing causes people to turn, that if you were somehow different, you'd finally be safe to give. That suspicion is not a diagnosis of your character. It is a description of who you've been choosing to invest in. You cannot help your way into someone's genuine appreciation if they are psychologically organized to prevent it. You can be more generous, more patient, more available. It will not change the architecture. It will only give the mechanism more material to work with. So what do you do with this? Watch for gratitude in the moment of need, and watch equally for how people treat you once the need has passed. The interval between those two things tells you almost everything. People who are safe to help remain connected to the help even after it's no longer convenient. Notice who asks for help frequently but resists giving credit freely. The person who can never quite acknowledge that someone came through for them is showing you in advance what they will do with whatever you give. Separate the act of helping from the expectation of relationship. Some people can be given to, not all of them can be in your life. These are different transactions. Confusing them is where most of the pain comes from. The world we live in has made this harder. Every act of generosity now happens inside an environment where comparison is constant and inescapable. The gap between you and the person you helped doesn't close when the screen closes. It is always open, always visible, always available to someone who wants to build a resentment from it at 2 in the morning. Status anxiety has a new infrastructure now, and it runs 24 hours a day. This is not an argument for giving less. It is an argument for precision. The people who are safe to help are out there. They are not rare. They are simply harder to see through the noise of people who cannot afford to receive. Go back to where this started. You helped them. You gave something real, and they used the distance you couldn't explain as evidence that something was wrong with you. Nothing was wrong with you. The giving was right. The choosing was the part that needed more light. Nietzsche wrote that to become who you are, you must first know what you are spending yourself on. The people who turned on you were not chaos in the creative sense. They were stagnation wearing the costume of crisis, and you were never going to become anything by staying in their orbit. You are not what happened when they left. You are what remained after it. If understanding the human soul at this level, not as an academic exercise, but as a practical tool for protecting what you have to give, is something you want to keep building, subscribe. Every video on this channel is built for exactly that. The person who sees clearly does not trust less. They choose better. That is the only real protection.